There is, on the edges of Kenya's Lake Nakuru, an eerie new world taking shape. One caught in flickering glimpses between the dead trees of a drowned forest and in the waters that swallowed up people's homes over a year ago now. Jane Wanjiru is taking us to see what's left of hers.
We thought it was just to come, and then after 6 months or 3 months, the water will go back.
But it didn't, sinking her dreams. Wanjiru had fought her way out of the slums and the single room she'd shared there with her 2 children to be able to buy something she could call her own.
When you come from very low and then you get something that you feel like you are proud of it, and then a disaster like this comes, you feel very bad, very bad.
Especially when there is no answer to calls for help. Over 200 households, most like Wanjiru's, were lost to the flooding here in Wariki. All are still waiting for compensation. David Kiragu bought his land in 1972, a small-scale farmer. He says he doesn't know how to start over again at his age and suffers from depression.
We are blaming people because they have interfered with the environment, especially even the other countries, because industries and all this.
Lake Nakuru lies in the Great Rift Valley, where flooding in a string of lakes has displaced thousands. Massive deforestation has made it worse, and seismic activity could be affecting groundwater levels. But most scientists agree climate change is an amplifier.
The reason why we think climate change could really be playing a role is because these sort of trends have really been accelerated in the past few decades. So there wasn't this before.
The lake has gone from some 40 square kilometers to 70, past the border of Nakuru National Park, which used to enclose it. Lines now blurred over who can fish where, and drawing unemployed youth desperate for a living.
What some officials at the county level have told us they'd like to see is for the government to come in and buy the land, even though it's underwater, as a way of compensating people who've lost their homes, and then to give the land to the national park, which is also under enormous pressure from the expansion of the lake.
Safari roads around it have been washed out, and available habitat for wild animals has shrunk, pushing them closer to human settlements. Flamingos on the lake still offer a picture of seemingly infinite beauty, but what lies beneath is turning deadly. Nakuru used to draw 1 million flamingos a year, but far fewer now. The salinity of the lake diluted, and so too the algae the flamingos feed on. As for the fish those young men are trying to catch, they're showing high levels of chemicals. For Kenya, climate change is a house of cards, and it hasn't stopped tumbling yet. To the north and east in Laikipia, in the shadow of Mount Kenya, the land is thirsty. And competition for it is growing. It's not easy to sneak 100 head of cattle on or off private land, but that's what's happening here through a cut fence, illegal grazing. Pastoralists who run cattle for a living say the failure of seasonal rains has made it a matter of life or death for their herds. Samuel Pareri is a member of the Maasai tribe.
Because we don't have a place to go and our cow are dying, so we see that this is the only place we can get grass.
The Maasai way of life, traditionally nomadic, is already under pressure to shift to sedentary farming and adopt drought-resistant crops. Joachim Kuraru is not a typical herder. A former teacher who works for an aid agency, he and his family still keep a small herd of cattle. But they've also been trying their hand at farming, with limited success.
An elephant came through this fence here. You can see the fence? The first season I actually planted, they were all destroyed by elephants.
Laikipia is home to the second largest elephant population in Kenya, along with a dozen wildlife conservancies and several ranches, still associated by many with the colonial days of white British rule.
People are coming up with the notion of conservation as a neo-colonialism. That is what we are thinking. Because people, they value, wild animals are valued more than us.
Abraham Jenga is a wildlife manager with a conservancy called Old Bajeta, 90,000 acres of grassland devoted to sustainable conservation. Some elephants have been raiding crops in a farming settlement next to the wildlife reserve, and he's on his way.
The idea we're trying is to push them back to the conservation area.
They've decided to bring in a helicopter, but even then, it's a challenge. At one point, an elephant seems to be trying to charge it. The helicopter lands to pick up Jenga, who'll fire blanks into the air. In the end, they only manage to redirect 2. It can be distressing to watch, but Jenga says it's for their own protection.
Actually, human-wildlife conflict is becoming even a bigger challenge now, seemingly even more than poaching, because we don't want people to retaliate.
The conservancy sits right at the equator on Mount Kenya's western side. It boasts the so-called Big Five animals on its safaris and turns those tourist dollars back into conservation and, it says, into community jobs. But the growth in farming all around is threatening already endangered species.
We are losing the wildlife migration routes and the corridors as well. Even the dispersal areas that we used to have to the south, now most of these parts, they are all settled.
Add to the mix the pastoralists fleeing drought, demanding access to conservancy watering holes and pastures, sometimes just taking it, and the gathering storm on the horizon becomes clear. The one thing uniting them is the same thing driving them: fear. To change cultures and ways of life, to anticipate and adapt to the extremes of climate change is an enormous task for any country, and Kenya is already facing battle on more than one front. On the ground, it feels like it's fighting it alone. Margaret Evans, CBC News, Kenya.